The red warning lights flashed across the control room as Admiral Jack Morrison walked toward the large communication device. His boots made heavy sounds on the metal floor. The Terran broadcasting station on Luna was the last place humans could send messages across space. Everything else was gone. Captain Lisa Grant stood near the quantum transmitter, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. The blue light from the machine made her face look tired and worried. She had been working without sleep for 3 days straight, trying to keep the station running while enemy ships got closer to Earth. "Admiral, the Coalition fleet is now 2 hours away from Mars orbit," she said, without looking up from her work. "Their ships number in the thousands. Our scouts counted at least 50 dreadnoughts." Morrison nodded slowly. He had expected this news, but hearing it still felt like a punch to his stomach. 3 years ago, when the war started, humanity had controlled dozens of star systems. They had colonies on hundreds of worlds. Now, Earth and Luna were all that remained. The war began when the coalition of 7 alien species demanded that humans pay taxes to their galactic government. Admiral Morrison remembered the day clearly. The Zephyrian ambassador had stood in the United Nations building and told humanity they had one choice: join the coalition as a servant species or face destruction. Humanity had chosen to fight. "Lieutenant." Commander Pete Williams came running into the control room. His uniform was dirty and his hair was messy. "Sir, we just lost contact with the Mars defense stations. The enemy broke through the outer ring." Morrison closed his eyes for a moment. The Mars stations had been their last real defense. Good men and women had died there, buying time for this final moment. He opened his eyes and looked at the communication device that would carry his words across the galaxy. "Lisa, are we ready to broadcast?" he asked. "Yes, sir. The quantum transmitter is at full power. Every ship, every planet, every station within 50 light years will hear this message," Captain Grant replied. Her voice was steady, but Morrison could see her hands shaking slightly. Morrison walked to the center of the room where a camera waited. Behind him, the large window showed Earth, floating in the darkness of space. The blue and green planet looked peaceful from here. But Morrison knew that millions of people down there were waiting to see if they would live through the next day. He thought about his daughter Sarah, who lived in New York. He thought about his grandson Tommy, who was only 5 years old and loved to play with toy spaceships. Morrison wondered if he would ever see them again. "Begin recording," he said. The red light on the camera turned on. Morrison stood straight and looked directly into the lens. When he spoke, his voice was calm and strong. "This is Admiral Jack Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. I am speaking to you from Luna Station, the last free human facility in the Sol system. For 3 years, your coalition forces have attacked our worlds. You have killed our people. You have destroyed our homes. You have shown no mercy to children, to families, to anyone who stood in your way." Morrison paused and took a deep breath. In his mind, he could see the reports from the outer colonies. Cities burned from orbit. Refugee ships destroyed while trying to escape. Entire worlds turned into graveyards. "We know your fleet approaches Earth. We know you think this war is almost over. We know you believe humanity will soon be extinct. But I want you to understand something very important." The Admiral's voice grew harder, like steel being forged. "In fire, humanity tried to find peace. We offered to share our technology. We offered trade agreements. We offered friendship. You chose war instead. You chose to hunt us across the galaxy like animals. You chose to ignore every attempt we made to stop the killing." Lieutenant Commander Williams watched from the corner of the room. He had served with Morrison for 15 years, but he had never seen the Admiral look like this. There was something dangerous in the old man's eyes, something that made Williams feel both proud and afraid. "So now I give you one final warning," Morrison continued. "Turn your ships around. Leave the system. Return to your own worlds and never come back. Do this now, while you still can." Morrison stepped closer to the camera. His face filled the screen. "Because if you continue this attack, if you force us to use our final option, you will regret this war more than any decision your species have ever made. You think you know what humanity is capable of. You think you have seen our weapons, our ships, our soldiers. You are wrong. Captain Grant looked confused. She knew about every weapon in the human fleet. She had read every report about their military technology. What was Morrison talking about? What final option? We are not the same species that first reached for the stars, Morrison said. We are not the same humans who built cities and farms on distant worlds. War has changed us. Your attacks have awakened something that was sleeping inside humanity. Something our ancestors left for us to find when we needed it most. Morrison turned slightly and nodded to Williams. The lieutenant, commander, walked to a different control panel, one that Grant had never seen used before. Williams placed his hand on a scanner and the machine beeped softly. Admiral, authorization confirmed. Protocol Omega is ready for activation, Williams said quietly. Grant felt a chill run down her back. Protocol Omega? She had never heard of any protocol with that name. She had security clearance for every human military project. What could Morrison be hiding? Morrison looked back at the camera one last time. You wanted to see what happens when you push humanity to the edge of extinction. You are about to find out. We tried to warn you. We tried to show you mercy. Now you will learn why that was the last mistake your species will ever make. The Admiral raised his hand and brought it down on a large red button. Immediately, alarms began ringing throughout the station. Deep beneath the surface of Luna, something ancient started to wake up. Energy readings spiked across every monitor in the control room. Message sent across all frequencies, Captain Grant reported. But her voice sounded far away. She was staring at the energy readings that made no sense. The power coming from inside Luna was impossible. It was more energy than their fusion reactors could produce in a year. Morrison walked to the window and looked out at Earth. Soon, the Coalition fleet would arrive. Soon, they would see what humanity had been hiding all along. He thought about his daughter and grandson again and smiled sadly. Sir, what is Protocol Omega? Grant asked. Morrison did not turn around. He kept watching Earth slowly turn in the darkness. Something we hoped we would never have to use, Captain. Something that will change everything. Outside, space looked empty and peaceful. But deep in the quantum networks that connected the galaxy, Morrison's message was already traveling faster than light, reaching every Coalition ship and every alien world. The final warning had been given. Now humanity would show the galaxy what regret truly meant. Dr. Amy Carter stared at the computer screen in her small laboratory aboard the Coalition flagship. The ship was massive, bigger than most human cities, and it carried enough weapons to destroy a planet. But right now, Amy was not thinking about weapons. She was thinking about the strange message they had just received from the human admiral. Amy was not like the other aliens on the ship. She was a xenobiologist, which meant she studied different species and how they lived. The Coalition had captured her from a research station 5 months ago, but instead of killing her, they had made her work for them. They wanted her to study humans and find their weaknesses. The Zephyrian captain Vexmore walked into her laboratory. He was tall and thin, with blue skin and 4 arms. His species looked like insects, but they were very smart and very cruel. Vexmore had been the one who captured Amy, and he enjoyed reminding her that her life depended on being useful. What did you think of the human's message? Vexmore asked. His voice sounded like metal scraping against stone. It was strange, Amy replied, not looking away from her screen. Admiral Morrison mentioned something about humanity not being the same species that first reached for the stars. He talked about ancestors leaving something for them to find. It does not make sense. Vexmore moved closer to her desk. Amy could smell the chemical scent that all Zephyrians had, like cleaning fluid, mixed with rotting flowers. Explain, he ordered. Amy pulled up files on her computer. For months she had been studying captured human data. Most of it was normal. Medical records, history books, scientific papers. But there were some files that puzzled her. Look at this, she said, pointing to a genetic chart on her screen. Human DNA has markers that should not exist. Pieces of genetic code that do not match anything else on Earth. It is like someone built humans in a laboratory. Vexmore's 4 eyes focused on the screen. Like all coalition species, he believed that humans were just another primitive race that got lucky with technology. But Amy had been finding evidence that suggested something very different. All species evolve, Vexmore said. What makes humans special? Amy opened another file. This one showed archaeological data from human colonies. Humans say they evolved on Earth over millions of years. But when they started exploring other worlds, they kept finding things. Old ruins, ancient technology. And every time they found these things, the technology responded to humans in ways it did not respond to other species. She showed him pictures of massive stone structures found on different planets. The structures were all built in the same style, even though they were thousands of light years apart, and in every case, the technology inside these ruins had activated when humans touched it. The humans call the builders of these ruins the architects, Amy continued. They think the architects were just another ancient species that died out long ago. But I think the truth is different. Vexmore was quiet for a moment. Amy could see his brain working behind his insect-like eyes. What truth? He asked. Before Amy could answer, alarms started ringing throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in. The corridors and the voice of Admiral Crickstall, the fleet commander, echoed from the speakers. All hands to battle stations. We have reached the Sol system. Prepare for final assault on human homeworld. Vexmore left quickly to join his combat unit. Amy stayed in her laboratory, but she opened a communication link to listen to what was happening. She heard the coalition pilots talking as their ships moved toward Earth. Target confirmed. Earth orbital defenses are minimal. Scanning for human fleet positions. Only a few dozen ships detected. This will be easy. Humans are finished. But Amy felt worried. She kept thinking about Admiral Morrison's message and the strange confidence in his voice. She went back to her computer and started searching through more captured human files. Then she found it. Hidden deep in a classified human military database was a file labeled Project Genesis, Level Omega Classification. Amy's translation software worked slowly on the human writing, but what she read made her hands shake. The file explained that human scientists had discovered the truth about their species 50 years ago. Humans were not from Earth originally. They had been created by the architects as part of a massive experiment that lasted millions of years. The architects had spread life across the galaxy, creating different species on different worlds. But humans were special. They were the final creation, designed with a unique genetic signature that served as a key to ancient architect technology. Amy read faster, her heart beating quickly. The file explained that the architects had not disappeared. They had gone into a kind of sleep, leaving behind massive automated systems throughout the galaxy. These systems were programmed to protect their final creation, humanity, if it ever faced extinction. The genetic key would only activate if the human species was about to die out completely. It was a fail-safe system, designed to ensure that the architect's greatest work would survive. Amy understood now why Admiral Morrison had sounded so confident. Humanity was not just another species fighting for survival. They were the children of the galaxy's greatest builders, and they had just activated an inheritance that had been waiting for millions of years. She tried to contact Captain Vexmore, but the communication systems were busy with battle orders. She tried to reach Admiral Crickstall directly, but her security clearance was too low. Meanwhile, in the ship's prison section, Commander Jake Sullivan sat in his small cell. He was the only human prisoner on the flagship, captured during a failed raid 3 weeks ago. The Coalition had been trying to get information from him, but Jake had told them nothing useful. Now he was smiling. Jake could hear the alien crew getting excited about their attack on Earth. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. Jake had been part of the team that discovered the Genesis files. He knew the truth about humanity's origin. More importantly, he knew what Protocol Omega really meant. The genetic trigger had been activated. Somewhere in the galaxy, ancient machines that had been sleeping for millions of years were starting to wake up. The architects had built safeguards to protect their greatest creation, and humanity had just called for help from their long-dead parents. Captain Vexmore returned to Amy's laboratory an hour later. His insect face looked excited. "The attack begins in 30 minutes, he told her. "Soon there will be no more humans to study." Amy looked at him with fear in her eyes, but not fear for humanity. "Captain, I need to show you something important. About the humans. About what they really are." But Vexmore was not listening. He was thinking about the glory of destroying Earth and the rewards he would receive from Admiral Crixtall. Amy watched him leave and looked back at her computer screen. The files about the architects were still open, showing pictures of massive structures scattered across the galaxy. In a few hours, Admiral Crixtall would learn what those structures were really for. Amy closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to her own gods. She prayed that somehow, when the truth was revealed, there would still be time to stop what was coming. Outside her laboratory window, Earth grew larger as the Coalition fleet moved closer to humanity's final stand. Colonel Ryan Clark stood on the command deck of the last human defense platform orbiting Earth. Through the large windows, he could see the Coalition fleet approaching like a dark cloud of metal and death. Thousands of enemy ships stretched across space, their weapons already charging for the final attack. "Sir, enemy fleet will be in firing range in 10 minutes, reported Lieutenant Sarah Brooks from her communication station. Her voice was calm, but Ryan could see the fear in her eyes. Everyone on the platform knew they were about to die. Ryan looked at the tactical display showing the approaching ships. The Coalition had brought everything they had, massive dreadnoughts that could crack a moon in half, carrier ships full of fighters and support vessels that could bombard a planet for weeks. Against this force, humanity had 12 defense platforms and maybe 30 warships. "All stations prepare for final engagement," Ryan ordered into his microphone. "Make every shot count." But even as he spoke, Ryan felt something strange. The air around him seemed to vibrate like the moment before lightning strikes. The metal walls of the platform hummed with an energy that should not have been there. On the Coalition flagship, Admiral Crixtall stood in his command center surrounded by holographic displays. The Zephyrian commander was 8 feet tall with armor like skin and eyes that glowed red when he was excited. Right now his eyes were burning bright. "Begin the attack," he ordered. "Destroy the human defense platforms first, then proceed to orbital bombardment of Earth." The Coalition fleet opened fire. Thousands of energy beams and missiles flew toward the human positions. Ryan watched the deadly light show approaching and prepared to give his life for his home planet. Then something impossible happened. Space itself seemed to tear open like cloth being ripped apart. Massive shapes emerged from the tiers. Ships so large they made the Coalition dreadnoughts look like toys. These vessels were pyramid-shaped and black as the void between stars. Each one was the size of a small moon. "What are those?" shouted Lieutenant Brooks, staring at her sensors in confusion. Ryan had never seen anything like them. The pyramid ships had appeared without warning, materializing around the Coalition fleet like they had been waiting there all along. His instruments could barely read them. The energy signatures were unlike anything in human or alien technology. The Coalition flagship. Panic spread through the command center. Captain Vexmore ran to Admiral Crixtall with a tablet showing sensor readings. "Sir, unknown vessels have appeared throughout the fleet. They are massive. Origin unknown," Vexmore reported, his forearms shaking. Admiral Crixtall studied the readings. With growing alarm, the pyramid ships were not just large. They were giving off energy levels that should have been impossible. Each ship contained more power than his entire fleet combined. "Where did they come from?" Crixtall demanded. "Unknown, sir." They appeared instantly, as if they materialized from another dimension. In her laboratory, Dr. Amy Carter watched the same readings on her computer. But unlike the others, she understood what was happening. She had read the Genesis files. She knew about the architects and their protective systems. "They have awakened," she whispered to herself. Amy ran from her laboratory toward the command center, pushing past confused alien soldiers in the corridors. She had to warn Admiral Crixtall about what these ships really were. She had to make him understand that the Coalition had made a terrible mistake. But before she could reach the command center, one of the pyramid ships moved. It turned slowly toward the Coalition fleet, and suddenly every screen on every ship showed the same thing. A face made of light and energy, ancient and terrible. When the architect spoke, its voice reached every mind simultaneously, speaking in whatever language each person understood best. The final creation is threatened. Protective protocols are now active. Aggressive species will be evaluated and judged. Admiral Krixtal felt ice in his veins. Open fire on the nearest pyramid ship. All weapons. Maximum power. The Coalition. Fleet obeyed. Hundreds of ships concentrated their weapons on one of the pyramid vessels. Energy beams that could melt mountains struck its surface. Nuclear missiles exploded against its hull. The attack continued for 30 seconds with enough firepower to destroy a planet. When the weapons stopped firing, the pyramid ship was completely undamaged. It had not even moved. On his defense platform, Colonel Ryan Clark watched in amazement. The pyramid ships, the Sentinels as his mind somehow knew to call them, were protecting humanity. He felt a strange connection to them, as if they recognized him as something precious that needed to be kept safe. "Colonel, I am receiving a transmission from the Sentinel ships," Lieutenant Brooks reported. "It is directed specifically at human receivers." "Put it through," Ryan ordered. The voice that came through the speakers was the same ancient voice, but now it spoke with warmth instead of warning. "Children of the architects, you have endured much suffering. Your genetic signature confirms your identity as the final creation. We have awakened to protect you as programmed. The aggressive species that threatens you will now face judgment." Ryan felt tears in his eyes. Humanity was not alone after all. Their creators had left guardians to watch over them. On the Coalition flagship, Admiral Krixtal was learning what judgment meant. The pyramid ship that had been attacked began to glow. Energy built up along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Dr. Amy Carter finally reached the command center and ran to Admiral Krixtal. "Admiral, you must stop this attack immediately," she shouted. "These are architect vessels. They are the guardians of humanity. If you continue fighting, they will destroy us all." Krixtal looked at her with rage. "Explain quickly." "Humans are not just another species. They were created by an ancient race called the Architects. These pyramid ships are automatic defense systems left behind to protect humanity if they ever faced extinction. You have triggered a protective response that could eliminate every Coalition world." But it was too late for explanations. The glowing pyramid ship released its judgment. The 3 Coalition vessels that had fired on it simply vanished. They did not explode. They did not burn. One moment they were there, and the next moment they were gone, as if they had never existed at all. The effect on the Coalition fleet was immediate. Panic spread through their communications as captains realized they were facing something beyond their understanding. These were not just powerful ships. They were forces of nature that could erase matter from existence. "All ships, retreat immediately," Admiral Krixtal ordered, his voice cracking with fear. But the pyramid ships had surrounded the entire Coalition fleet. There was nowhere to run. More Sentinels appeared throughout the Sol system, taking positions around Earth and Luna. Their presence created a protective barrier that no weapon could penetrate. Then they began to move outward, following quantum signatures back toward every Coalition homeworld. Lieutenant Sarah Brooks monitored the expanding network of Sentinel positions on her communication equipment. "Colonel, the Sentinels are not just here. They are appearing near every Coalition planet, hundreds of them, maybe thousands." Ryan understood what was happening. The Architects had not just built guardians for humanity. They had built a network that could reach across the entire galaxy. The Coalition had awakened sleeping giants that could judge entire civilizations. In his prison cell, Commander Jake Sullivan finally stopped smiling. He had wanted the Coalition to face consequences for their war crimes, but this was bigger than revenge. This was the awakening of galactic law itself. The Sentinels were not just protecting humanity. They were preparing to reshape the galaxy, according to the will of its ancient builders. And Admiral Krixtal's fleet was about to learn what it meant to face the judgment of gods. Admiral Crixtel stood in his command center watching his empire die. On the main screen, reports came in from across the galaxy. Coalition worlds were going dark one by one as the Architect Sentinels arrived at each planet. The ancient pyramid. Ships were not destroying everything, but they were taking apart the Coalition's ability to make war. Shipyards that had built warships for 1,000 years simply stopped working. The machines shut down and would not restart. Communication networks that connected dozens of star systems fell silent. Military bases found their weapons turning to dust when soldiers tried to use them. "Sir, we have lost contact with the Zephyrian homeworld," reported Captain Vexmore. His blue skin had turned pale with fear. The last message said that Sentinel ships were dismantling our orbital defense platforms piece by piece. Crixtel felt a pain in his chest that had nothing to do with his body. His people were dying, and it was his fault. He had been so proud, so certain that the Coalition could crush humanity like an insect. Now he understood what Admiral Morrison had meant by regret. Dr. Amy Carter stood nearby, watching the destruction with mixed feelings. Part of her felt satisfied that the Coalition was paying for their crimes against humanity and other species. But another part of her was terrified by the power of the Sentinels. These ancient machines did not think like living beings. They followed their programming without mercy or understanding. "Admiral, we need to contact the humans," Amy said. "They might be the only ones who can stop this." Crixtel looked at her with his glowing red eyes. "You think they will listen? After what we have done to them? It is our only chance." Meanwhile, on Luna Station, Admiral Jack Morrison was dealing with his own problems. The Sentinels had contacted him directly, their ancient voices speaking inside his mind. They wanted to know how humanity wished to handle their enemies. "The aggressive species have been contained," the lead Sentinel communicated. "Shall we proceed with complete elimination, or do the final creation wish to show mercy?" Morrison stood in his command center with Captain Lisa Grant and Lieutenant Commander Pete Williams. Through the windows they could see the massive pyramid ships positioned around Earth like protective shields. The sight should have made him feel safe, but instead, Morrison felt the weight of an impossible decision. "How many Coalition worlds are there?" he asked Captain Grant. "Intelligence estimates put their total population at around 40 billion beings across 7 star systems," Grant replied. Morrison closed his eyes. 40 billion lives. Most of them were probably innocent. Farmers, teachers, children who had never even heard of humanity, but their governments had chosen to wage a war of extinction against his species. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the Coalition flagship," Lieutenant Commander Williams reported. "They are requesting permission to speak with you directly." Morrison nodded. "Put them through." The main screen flickered and Admiral Crixtel's face appeared. The proud Zephyrian leader looked broken. His armor was cracked, and his red eyes had dimmed to barely glowing embers. "Admiral Morrison," Crixtel said, his metallic voice quiet, "I come to you not as an enemy, but as a being who has made a terrible mistake. I understand now what you tried to warn us about. We should have listened." Morrison studied the alien's face. 3 years ago, this same creature had given the order to destroy human colonies. Morrison's own brother had died in the attack on Centauri Prime, along with his wife and 2 children. "What do you want?" Morrison asked coldly. "Mercy," Crixtel replied. "Not for me. I deserve whatever punishment you choose. But for my people. For the billions who never wanted this war." Before Morrison could respond, the Sentinel voice spoke in everyone's mind simultaneously. "The aggressive species seeks negotiation. This was not anticipated in our programming. Please provide guidance, final creation." Morrison felt the weight of 40 billion lives pressing down on his shoulders. He thought about his brother Tom and his family, killed by Coalition weapons. He thought about the refugee ships full of human children that had been destroyed while trying to escape. He thought about the colonies that had been burned from orbit. But he also thought about his grandson Tommy, who would grow up in whatever galaxy Morrison chose to create today. "I need to speak with someone," Morrison said. "Patch me through to the Coalition prison section. I want to talk to Commander Jake Sullivan, A few minutes later, Jake's face appeared on a smaller screen. The captured human officer looked tired but alert. "Admiral," Jake said with a slight smile, "I told them they would regret this war. Jake, you helped design the Protocol Omega systems. You understand the architects better than anyone. What do you think they would want us to do?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking carefully. "Sir, the architects created humanity to be different from other species. Not just stronger or smarter, but better, more capable of growth and change. I think they would want us to prove that we learned something from this war." Morrison nodded slowly. He understood what Jake meant. He turned back to Admiral Crickstall on the main screen. "Here are my terms," Morrison said. "The Coalition will surrender all military vessels immediately. Your species will be relocated to the outer rim of the galaxy, where the Sentinels will monitor you permanently. Any attempt to build weapons of war will result in immediate intervention." Crickstall's face showed relief, but Morrison was not finished. "However, you will not be destroyed. Your people will be allowed to live and build peaceful civilizations under architect oversight. The Sentinels will provide basic technology and resources to help you start over." Dr. Amy Carter stepped forward on the Coalition flagship. "Admiral Morrison, this is Dr. Amy Carter. I have been studying the architect systems. I believe I can help coordinate the relocation process and serve as a liaison between our species." Morrison looked at the alien scientist who had risked her career to understand humanity. "Dr. Carter, that would be appreciated. But understand this, the galaxy is different now. The Sentinels are awake and they will not sleep again. Any species that chooses aggression over cooperation will face the same judgment you did." Over the next several hours, the surrender proceeded smoothly. Coalition ships powered down their weapons and allowed Sentinel vessels to escort them to designated areas. The pyramid ships began the massive task of relocating entire civilizations to new worlds where they could start fresh. Commander Jake Sullivan was released from prison and brought to Luna Station. He worked with Dr. Carter to establish communication protocols between humanity and the Coalition survivors. 2 weeks later, Admiral Morrison stood again before the quantum transmitter. But this time, his message was different. "This is Admiral Jack Morrison speaking for humanity and our architect guardians. The war is over. A new age has begun in our galaxy. The ancient protectors are awake, and they will ensure that no species ever again faces the choice between slavery and extinction." Morrison paused and looked out at Earth, where reconstruction was already beginning. "We could have chosen revenge. We could have let the Sentinels destroy our enemies completely. Instead, we choose to build something better. A galaxy where strength protects the weak, where differences are celebrated instead of feared, and where war is a last resort instead of a first choice." Captain Lisa Grant smiled as she sent the message across the galaxy. It would reach every world, every ship, every being capable of understanding language. "The Guardians watch over us all now," Morrison concluded. "Let this be a warning and a promise. Choose peace and the galaxy will welcome you. Choose war and you will face powers beyond your imagination." The transmission ended, and Morrison walked to the window where Earth turned slowly in space. His grandson Tommy would grow up in a safer galaxy, one where ancient wisdom guided the future and humanity had proven worthy of their inheritance.